Soul Survivor Outdoor here in Carlsbad, California, and we have the pleasure of having our area directors from around the country and have a few discussions about command impact and so forth, and that's what we'll be talking about today. But again, we want to remind people that Soul Survivor Outdoor is an active duty focused outdoor adventure company. And so what that means is we are doing outdoor stuff, whether that's rock climbing or skydiving, surfing, sailing, good fun things for the service members who are typically 18 to 25 or 6 years old, and they are serving all over the world. They're continuing to deploy. Fort Campbell has 600 service members deploying around Ukraine coming up really soon. And that's continuous deployments, new deployments of more folks all around the world. And I heard from somebody the other day that their son had just gotten back from Syria. I didn't even know we had people in Syria, but they're deploying all over the place. And so we want to point them to a firm foundation. And that is what Soul Survivor Outdoor is doing through outdoor adventure. And it's happening all across the country and now even across the globe, as Richard was in Poland a few weeks ago. And we want to continue to do that. And we want to bring the life and light of Jesus Christ to these active duty service members. And but we also know and we respect that not every military leader would necessarily have exactly the same viewpoint of faith that we do. But nonetheless, what is the value that we bring to the military commander? Because they have chaplains working for them, but the health and well-being of the force is the responsibility of that commander. So whether it's mental, physical, spiritual fitness, it's the commander's responsibility. And I think they know and appreciate that, but they may not always necessarily fully identify with or understand why Soul Survivor Outdoor is taking the approach that we do. And I thought we'd start with Richard because he's spent a lot of time thinking about this and writing papers on it and various other things. And so, Rich, I want to talk about that. What do you think the value is of what we're doing and how it's impacting the lives of the soldiers at Fort Campbell or the service members across the planet? What's the value to the commander?
Value to commander, which again, thank you for being here, for allowing me to be here and be a part of this team. But for the commanders, and I just simply down to mission focus, mission readiness, is that this is a multiplication or force multiplier.
Right.
Is that when you have physically fit soldiers, and if you lose a soldier based on, like we had combatives at 5th Group, so we're doing combatives and guys get hurt we're doing our combatives training. That person is off the team until they can heal or from that. And that has happened as you break something. But now it's like you have physical fitness, so you're trying to maintain the physically fit soldiers so that way they're mission ready, they're mission capable. Well, now you have the physical fitness or the spiritual fitness component. It just doesn't impact the soldier because now it's going to the family.
Right.
And so when a soldier is spiritually ready, which is all component of the holistic health and fitness, the U.S. Army FM 7-22. So when you see this total person concept and they are ready to deploy,
right,
the family is ready to deploy because they are stronger spiritually.
Right.
Now you're impacting the unit's readiness. Now you're impacting the mission that is assigned to that unit. So for the commander, this is your mission readiness right here. You have spiritually strong soldiers. You have strengthened your families. You have strengthened your unit. You're ready to go. It's like when you are briefing the commanders on there. Yes, we are more capable.
Yeah. It's, we talk mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially fit. It's DOD mandated that service members be fit in these areas. The commanders are having to pay attention to this sort of thing. If we're thinking people, we know that humans are multidimensional, and so they're not just about the physical. And if you have something physically going on, we know, oh my gosh, I've got this thing happening, and now I don't sleep very well at night.
The first rule or we would say within a special operation as a Green Beret, is that humans are more important than hardware. We need people, we need individuals to fill that uniform. You were talking about the other day is that uniform doesn't do anything until someone puts it on. Right. And so each of our units and what they're needing, we need a fit individual, be it physically, emotionally, spiritually. And it's the whole person that's been made in God's image. That's needed for a strong unit. You have a strong unit or a strong soldier, a strong family, you have a strong unit.
Yeah, even the outdoor component. You know, we're talking to a senior Marine commander. His unit is exceptionally busy, and they have a very important mission. And he said, "No, this is yes, we are super busy. We have some things that are really super critical, but we have got to get folks to unplug and get out, re-energize, recenter, recalibrate, which is the whole piece, because, you know, it's not just outdoor adventure, it's the spiritual component, it's being fed, it's being relatable, family, the whole everything." And so I know you're experiencing the same thing, you know, down there at Fort Cavazos in Texas with the commanders and folks down there, and the interest growing and growing. And I know that's not just coming from the chaplaincy, it's coming from commanders as well, Tony. So, you know, how's that going down there?
Yeah, I'd say what we're looking at is death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each of those moral issues that a soldier has, or that a commander's soldiers have, that's a cut. Each experience that one of those soldiers has in combat, in a lot of different areas of their life, that's going to take them away from the fight.
Right.
But that faith, that understanding that we have a God that's looking out for us, that'll always have our back no matter what, and has a plan that's much better than ours. That understanding helps build that resiliency, that those cuts no longer mean as much. Those cuts are now superficial. And they're not going to impact us. They're not going to impact the commander. They're not going to impact the unit or the national directives that are behind what each and every one of these soldiers, down to the Lance Corporal, the PFC, is not going to impact that mission. And they're going to be able to get back up, and they're going to be able to take care of their families and the mission. Right. And that's what's important.
Yeah. It's, you know, knowing that there's this whole dynamic going on, and that we're going to be strong in each one of these areas. So critically important. And
that's what it's like, being able to measure that. So how do you measure spiritual fitness?
Right.
And so that is, even within the special operations community, is that there are models that they're looking at how to measure this. And it's those questions, those existential questions. And it's like, you know, do you believe in God? It's like, from there, what's your identity? And it's like, you're seeing this, so now you can give these assessments and be able to measure. Because when I was in the Army, it was like, we take a PT test. How do you measure your physical fitness? How do you measure your emotional fitness? And so we are being able to capture that. Well, now we're in this, I think was 2020, that SOCOM came up with this as a CHAMP SOCOM spiritual fitness tool that you can measure.
Right.
The Navy has one where you can measure this. We are able to give that to the commanders now. We're able to impact that by having our spiritual fitness events or spiritual readiness events, being able to, those who are, because it is all voluntary, and that we are a Christ-centered organization, and being able to invite them out, we can strengthen those units with these events, and being able to share that truth, share that light.
And Rick, when you had Wounded Warrior Detachment, and you were the commander for those Marines and sailors, isn't that where Soul Survivor Outdoors started? What was the impact that you saw?
Well, yeah, that is a great question, because you spend a lot of time thinking about how to solve problems. And I know that's, you know, when the Department of Defense is sitting thinking, you know, how, and you touched on it, Tony, in terms of moral and ethical decision making, and being informed about that, and knowing where right and wrong come from and everything, those death by 1,000 cuts. You know, when you understand who you are and where morality and ethics and all those things come from, it makes you so much more prepared. And that is part of this whole discussion. And even when we go out and do our events, the faith just fits right in the middle of that, and I would say is even foundational. And so as that detaching commander of these wounded Marines in this particular case, it was examining, seeing what was happening with them, and knowing that their medical situation and psychological condition and so forth was part of the equation, but that there was something more fundamental, like what's happening below at the more surface or below the surface level. You know, we use the analogy of an iceberg, and you see just what's at the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much else going on below. And so I really spent a lot of time thinking about what else is happening here. You know, they've served in combat, they're physically fit, they're mentally fit, but now they've come back and they're completely falling apart. And as you start to kind of pull the layers back from people and find out about who they are and what informs how they make decisions, and, you know, are they a solid individual? And you go, wow, this person doesn't have anything. They're not standing on anything. There is no foundation that they live their life from. And so, you know, Jesus talked about building your house on the rock, and we talk about that all the time, or on sand. And I would say these guys had their lives built on water. They wouldn't even, you know, sand would be a firm foundation. And so then it just became, okay, how can we creatively be able to have a discussion of faith? So, you know, I don't claim to be smarter than the folks that a few years later have said, oh, spiritual fitness is so important, because obviously chaplaincy and religion and things of that nature have been a core value for the U.S. military from our country's founding. But the focus specifically on spiritual fitness has really taken a hard turn in a positive direction over the last few years. And it was very evident to me that there was more happening with these service members, that it really boiled down to what's the foundation for living that they have, because they could be very physically fit and they might even be mentally fit, but the spiritual fitness or the lack thereof was leading to, you know, the level of stress that they experienced post combat, right? And the impact that led to suicidal ideation, or the attempts at suicide, or the coming home and abusing their family, and you know, and drinking and beating up a spouse and ending up in jail and things of that nature. And I think that really all came back to they didn't have this firmer foundation for living, and every little problem then and I say little, that's not meant to make it smaller really, but even what I guess I'm saying is the little problem. So, you know, the triggers, we talk about triggers, and you go some tiny little thing and you blow up and you come completely off the handle. And so there's an underlying cause to that. And when you're spiritually fit and you're centered and you're grounded in that, then the impacts of the stressors, whether they're tiny little stressors because a kid knocked over a glass of milk and you lost it and you can't even explain why that was so it's such a big deal, or something else that was leading you to suicide, your foundation is just set. And so that was really the catalyst or the impetus for why we started this in the first place, was to say, okay, there's all the, you know, we're mentally and we're physically fit, but there's something else missing. And having been a Christian all those years, I thought, how can we talk about this in an authentic way that doesn't have somebody feeling like they told me to believe this, but can we have a discussion about this, and can we point them to ultimate truth? So, yeah,
that's good.
That's awesome.
So,
and I think it also feeds them in a couple other ways, and that's the identity, because a lot of them were being removed from the service.
yep,
A lot of them had to get
absolutely.
out. And I think a lot of them had most of their support network, most of their fellowship, or people that they would spend time with, are still in country.
Yep.
So those are some of the big things that they've lost. And that's when you say the tiny thing, the spilled milk,
Right.
that's just going to set them off. And I think we're addressing all of those.
Yeah.
So what I
That
appreciate.
commander out.
What I appreciate with in seeing in the special operations community is like they have preservation of the force and family. Within that is the spiritual component. And so it's being recognized. And I think that more and more we're seeing how important that the spiritual component, if you want to call it spiritual readiness, how
Right.
important it is into seeing individuals as how we are created in God's image on there. So if it's active duty, even now with VA, and as you get out, we do understand that for us to have a true holistic approach to mental health care
Right.
or your emotional care individually for the family, the spiritual component is so important. But that's, goes right back to for active duty, your combat readiness, your mission readiness is touching on this area. Are you grounded in your identity? Then being able to, one, handle issues and being able to effectively continue that mission.
And I know, Randy, you served on recruiting as well, and I know that your faith's been important to you for a very long time. Maybe, I guess, your entire Marine Corps career. And so, I think it's safe to say that you were more fit holistically when you have Christ at the foundation. And you had some very formative things you've described to us in the past about decisions you had to make. That maybe were moral decisions but your faith factored into that. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that was foundational throughout my career, and whether I leaned on that, my strengths and weaknesses often waned or waxed depending on how much I leaned on that.
Sure.
And said, hey, this is important and this is foundational. And I think those critical moments, that's where you did see your faith come through when it was a true crisis. But I think there's the day-to-day piece of it. And I think that's what I see when we talk about commanders. I compare this a little bit to the logistics program. If you want to win the long-term war, you got to have a good logistics system. And we put a lot of science and art into logistics and the repeatability and preventive maintenance side of that. And that helps us stay for the long haul. And what we're seeing in our current active duty military, especially with the stresses of deployment, the stresses of family separation, not being there for events, where's the endurance piece playing out when they're in theater for 9 months, 12 months, and they're running back for another rotation? We're seeing a lot of crises. And we're seeing, actually, I think Tony referred to it a little bit earlier, is just, hey, you've got people that, hey, we're going to short tour this person in theater because there's a lot of issues going on with this person, and I can't rely on this person as a commander for whatever reason. And we know what it looks like when it's physical. We know what happens if you got to go see the doc or something, and hey, do we need to pull you out of theater? But the whole spiritual piece is a lot more nebulous. And the hope is when you're doing things like we're doing with Soul Survivor Outdoor, is we're giving these people skills while they're active duty to not only in the near term be a better soldier, airman, sailor, Marine, guardian. When you're out there with your unit, you've got this foundation that says, hey, things are going to get rough, and I'm going to do a 16-hour day, and these things are going to be targeted at me. But you know what? I've got something foundational that I can get through this. I know there's another side to this, not, hey, I'm going to crumble. And how that works in the near term is essential for that commander's near-term readiness. But then you look longer term, and it's like, how resilient is this individual for multiple deployments or the next tour, or the next duty station? And are we going to retain this person or are we not going to retain that person? So the holistic picture of that service member. And what's really interesting to me, and I know a lot of us in the room, is what about after your time in the military? We have all lost more people, friends, acquaintances, to suicide after their time in the military than we did in the combat environment. And that is due to often, a lot of times, of people not having that foundation that says, hey, when I took that uniform off and I had this grand identity as a leader who had been in for 20 years and I did all these things and I had this identity, and then 5 years later you find yourself wallowing in a different identity that is not seemingly as important or as impactful, or you're isolated, like Tony said earlier. How does that play out? And hopefully these commanders who are working with people today are reaching out to resources that can help them build service members that have that foundational strength, so that, hey, when they are in the out years, we're not seeing the issues of anxiety turning into depression, turning into suicide. We've turned that around.
Yeah, and
Just to touch on what Randy said here, is that now we're seeing more on these additional podcasts. More commanders, more senior non-commissioned officers are talking about these things, which are great. But it needs to get down to the when it comes to the line and down to the soldiers, and that's what we do. That's what Soul Survivor Outdoor is bringing to the table for the commander, is that we can have these discussions.
Yeah, and I know that we can talk more about this, and we're going to pretty much wrap it up. But the commanders the military leaders who are taking an honest, objective look at this. The research, people are all about research. The research shows that a whole person, including spiritual fitness, makes people better prepared to handle those challenges on and off the battlefield. It reduces things like there are real tangibles like, religious practice, and this is speaking to religion as a whole, but when people attend a service, that there's X amount of reduction of driving under the influence, drug usage. 2 times a month reduces it even more, 3 times even more. All of a sudden you go, somebody who has a strong faith is exceptionally unlikely to do any of these negative behaviors and be a mission capable service member. So those are things that the services are looking at. They're taking it very seriously. And we're putting wheels on that bus, so to speak, and saying, okay, we're going to take it out of the classroom. We're going to make it very engaging, and we're going to make it very real to that line soldier, that Marine, that Coastie, Airman, sailor. And so anyway, again, thank you guys. Just, I'm just get goosebumps hanging out with you guys. It's like, hey, if you liked Rick, meet these guys because they're just, they're head and shoulders above me. Literally, Tony's sitting here taller than me. So anyway, God bless you guys. I love you guys, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Rick.
You betcha.